because you can always continue if you're not finished, but we have started it. You think there's something going on? In the last 10 minutes, you realize things? Okay, right? Was it helpful? All right, good. Okay. Let me just say this, that if you're getting triggered, meaning if it's so deep and you need to relax, you can maybe stop, because we don't have psychologists here who can help you. You can stop, and if it's too heavy for you, maybe there's some. If it's too heavy for you, we don't have that structure yet in place. But eventually we'll have a structure in place. Then we have, psychologists, healers waiting for us in those rooms, and you can consult them. But if it gets too heavy, then you just kind of relax and maybe go out for a few minutes and then recompose yourself and then get back to the thing. All right? What we want is safety. That's the first thing that needs to happen when there's no healing without safety. So if you feel unsafe, just stop and then recompose yourself. Okay, adaptation. How do we adapt? How do we adapt? It's a good thing to learn this a little bit. How do we adapt? So I will read from this literature, and just to understand how we adapt. Because if we don't know it, then we don't know what to do, right? So human beings instinctively seek psychological distance from events that are very unpleasant, traumatic, that would wound them, or from deep memory, to avoid being overwhelmed by the remembrance. Okay? It's part of our, in fact, the animal nature, right? Even animals, they don't like that. They leave whenever there's a lot of stimuli that's overwhelming. To keep going on, we must physically split off from what is happening right now. What did happen a moment ago and what might happen next. So the author is using a technical term, split off. Later on, we will define this. What is split off or splitting? Whether in wartime, in a concentration camp, or in the context of childhood abuse and neglect, some sense of self must be kept separate from the horrifying events around us, even if that self just goes through the motions of life. To get up each morning and face death, abandonment, assaults, or imprisonment requires somehow disowning the horror and fear left from the day before and the dread of what is to come. Otherwise, you see this, so the person will disown what happened yesterday so that he can exist the next day. So I know somebody that I was directing who's always, mom and dad were always fighting. So in order for this person to live another day, he kind of dismisses it, reject, disown what was happening in the family. So disowning the other one inside, the one that's been affected by the events, is a survival response. The overwhelming feelings are no longer ours. That shame does not belong to us, but to him or her. So what happens to the child who's been exposed to all this? Example, fighting between mom and dad. Sometimes there's violence. Then he's split off. There's a splitting that goes on. So that's the person who suffered that violence in the family. That's him or her. It becomes a third person. Okay? By disowning our traumatized parts, or the not me self. Remember, the not me self is like, I'm supposed to grow up in a perfect world. But all these challenges, all these attacks, breaches on my soul, on my psyche, is not supposed to be me. So not me. So I disown that not me. By disconnecting from them emotionally or losing consciousness of them. Via dissociation, we preserve our hearts and souls from growing as bitter as our circumstances. We hold out hope for the future and we keep going. You see? So did you see this? That's why I go back to what was going on, to the first concept I presented. It's actually a red badge of courage because the person wants to keep going on in life. So he kind of he or she disowns all the traumatic events that happened yesterday, right? Or that happened that very day. So he goes on and on and on. You know, if you really think about it, so some of you there might be some light bulbs flashing in your brain. This is how when the person begins to really get away from realities and begin to live in fantasies. And you see that? That's when a lot of our sexual fantasies, things like that, this kind of proximity to things that give pleasure begin to take shape. Because the person is trying to live a life, trying to get away from all those events that are very unpleasant. So let me just define again the not me self. Because it's an aberration. It does not belong to the normal process of how a child should grow. So then therefore, the child disowns it. That's not me. All right? I dissociate from that. So disowning is another word for dissociation. I dissociate. Did you notice that in adult life we still carry this? We dissociate when it's triggering an implicit memory in us, so we begin to dissociate. So we'll address that as we go on further. A lot of this will be repeated in our lectures. Okay, I mentioned something implicit memory. So let me define that now. Next week, I'll give you a lot of definition of terms, but it's good to write it down and define it as we're meeting it. What is implicit memory? It's very important when we begin to understand. So there's two kinds of memories. Explicit. So explicit is a declarative memory. I can declare. I can say, I was born in October 20, 1963. Okay, so that's explicit memory. What about implicit memory? Implicit memory resides in the emotions and in the body. So you cannot declare unless you begin to. So an implicit memory, in fact, is a good example of implicit memory is riding a bike. You just know how to ride a bike. But when you begin to describe it, then it becomes explicit. All right? So it's one example. But a lot of implicit memory from trauma resides in the body and in the emotions. So you cannot really explain it. It's just there. It's not declarative. And a lot of the implicit memories are not connected. There's a lot of gaps, right? So all of us are carrying implicit memories in our bodies, in our minds, from wounds that we have suffered. All right? But if I asked you, can you describe this implicit memory? So you could describe it in terms of your feelings, emotions, but it's not like something that's explicit. Okay? So implicit memory. So there's now splitting or disowning. And if you want to be technical about it, this left brain and the right brain, they're like connected by fibers, right? And what happens when we split, because the left brain is about planning, it's about math, it's about thinking, while the right brain is about emotions, about the arts, about things that are not, structured too much. And a lot of trauma resides on the right brain because it's the emotion. And we begin to split from it. All right? The left brain begins to split. So that's the scientific explanation of splitting. So distancing from the trauma serves another important function in childhood, another way of surviving. It allows us not just to keep going on, but to keep growing and developing despite whatever befalls us. So you see, adaptation or splitting is a good thing. Because if you did not split, then you cannot grow. You cannot keep going on, right? With distance or disconnection from the trauma, children can focus on mastering age appropriate developmental tasks and developing a repertoire of functional abilities. When part of the child can concentrate on normal activities, such as going to school, can experience new learning and mastery, can play sports, make friends, there is an opportunity for normal development of exploratory and social drives. The going on with normal life self, unaware of what is happening, meaning because I rejected that. Then, of course, he might become a good student, a lover of nature, a lover of horses, a lover of books, or making things with his hands. So you see this, it's very common. There's a lot of examples. I was listening to Mariah Carey, you know her, like very good singer. And she was being interviewed. Why is it that you're just a really good singer? And she said, because when I was growing up, I felt really neglected by my father. And all I do is sing. Right? There's a lot of stories like that. And I just keep singing to like soothe myself. So, meaning, in our context, I split from that thing and I develop myself. That's why you're all developed. Remember, imagine if we were like really just like overburdened by the trauma or the wounds or the unpleasant events in our life and we did not split, we did not adapt, then none of us will be here. It depends, I guess, on the trauma, right? So that's why it's a red badge of courage. So I go back to the first thing. And we want to reconcile with ourselves and begin to heal. When there's no self-compassion, because I cannot accept, all these bad things in me, then we don't heal. Okay? So here's another example. And so this is like just like making us understand this splitting, this adaptation, this dissociation that we do as children. For example, in times of war, in abusive families, or in a concentration camp, it might also be adaptive to disown normal physical needs. So you can also disown good things. We can disown attachment seeking or the wish to be comforted. When we disown needs that cannot be met or feelings that are unacceptable, we protect ourselves from unbearable disappointment or punishment. You see? So I disown the need to be comforted. I mean, if you're in concentration camp in Auschwitz, for the sake of an extreme example, there's no comforting there. So you disown comforting. You disown attachment, right? Because no one will give it to you. Then, of course, you'll just be disappointed if you don't disown it. One way to accomplish this challenging task is to split the sense of desperate needing and the refusal to need anything between two parts. One part that actively seeks attachment or comfort or needs meeting, and one that just as actively pushes others away or keeps a hypervigilant, suspicious distance. This becomes like, why am I like attached to this person, but at the same time I want to detach from that person because it's part of splitting. So we will have examples of this later on. When the individual must adapt to an environment that punishes or ignores a child's basic needs and feelings, self-compassion too becomes dangerous, right? It cannot be me. Depending upon what best promotes safety and optimal development in its unique environment, Children might have to identify with their angry, aggressive, hypervigilant parts and disown their innocent, trusting, attachment seeking parts, or they might have to reject the parts that bore the brunt of the abuse so that the trauma can be blamed on their vulnerability. Okay, you begin to see that, I reject my being innocent, my being a nice kid, because I want to survive. So I disown that. I need to be really aggressive. I need to be angry. I need to be hyper vigilant just in order to survive. Okay? All right. All right. Let me pause here. Pause here. Any questions? Yes.
So would you say then that you're saying that we all do this, we split, we adapt, but what if you don't do that? Is that when you see adults or young adults with severe problems, psychological problems and emotional problems, or not being able to survive?
Yes. So,
Like high school, I taught high school, right? So
mhm.
I would see, and this person has gone through so much, and they're going, they're doing what they have to do. But then I have another student that has experienced trauma, and they just can't do anything.
Cannot do anything. Okay.
So they're like, why can't this person keep going and this
Mhm.
person can't?
Okay. So the first answer, I guess, is the degree of trauma. Yes. So the other person that might like not perform well, maybe the degree of trauma was so much, the severity of trauma was so much that it really overwhelmed the person, and the person can no longer like get going on. The word get going on. So we were talking about how it's good to split, because if you don't split, then it's very hard to live a life, to get going on and to be good at school, right? So the severity of trauma. There's also all these studies that present that, you know, it's always kids receive trauma in very different ways. It could be an equally the same trauma, but a kid might receive it and it might overwhelm that kid so much as opposed to another kid. Okay, so here's an example, personal example. So this is there's no more shame because I've been healed. So my mom, I love my mom. My mom like raised 12 kids, and I'm the eighth of 12. Some of you know that. And one day, I was visiting my brother in Washington State. I'm very close to him. We're very close to each other. And I said to him, "You remember that day?" Because we talk about healing in my family. "You remember that day when mom was very angry at you and she took a fork from the table?" I think we were in front of the dining table. We were eating, or we just finished eating. And she was so angry at you that she took the fork and she's about to like stab you. Okay, but of course, mom will not stab him, because my brother Mel was always looked at as the black sheep, very mischievous. But he wasn't really. He probably like needed attention when he was growing up. So my mom was like, okay, really angry. And then I remember that, and my brother just laughed. I said, "What did you do? Why are you just laughing?" "Oh, I just laugh it off." And he says to me, "No wonder you became a priest." I said, "Why?" "Because you're always observing." And it really affected you. It might have wounded me, really, because I still remembered it. My mom was really angry, and okay, behave. If not, whatever she said. So I can't remember all these things because it's implicit memory. What I remembered was mom holding the fork about to stab my brother. You see? So my brother received it like very lightly, but I receive it in a deep way. All right? So the other part of the question is, when does a person not split? Of course, it's all pleasant, loving, then there's no splitting. Splitting only happens when there's something that the person cannot process, when it overwhelms the person. Okay? All right. Any more questions? There's, okay. Let me, we probably should have a microphone here. Okay, what's the question?
That tend to develop personality, not being able to discern wrong, or was there any I, so you see it all split,
Good.
I guess, what I'm saying.
Okay, I didn't get the whole question, but I think what you're saying, if there's no splitting, right? Okay, did you see this? So, and we will touch on this later on. There has to be integration in every person, right? We're always talking about integration. And so, when there's splitting, so there's always splitting when there's unpleasant events in life, depending on how unpleasant. When it's very unpleasant, we could really disown it or split from it. So maybe like severe trauma, not, I think a lot of us don't have, I don't know, of course I don't know you, but if there's like sexual abuse, like trauma that's severe enough, then a person would actually split, will adapt. All right? Now, there's people that, you meet a person, it's like, wow, this person is just so whole. And I remember like one of my brothers in the old days, I said, man, you were well loved. You can really, if you know psychology and you've been observing people, you can tell when a person is well loved. There's still some, deficiencies in the personality, but the person really is so just wholesome and loving, non-judgmental. Okay? So, am I answering your question? I think I forgot the train of your.
If you don't split, would that cause question in the person's self, like, was it your fault?
Ah.
Was it your fault, or was it the other person, or was it the situation's fault, or was it all your self-blame? If you don't split, does that cause that type of a thought?
Okay. All right. I think if you don't split, that means the event, the trauma wasn't severe enough that it did not make you split. So that means, so I'm going back to a person who's really fully integrated or integrated. So there are, I mean, if I hear my mom and dad fight in my whole lifetime only 3 times, those are unpleasant events. But I probably won't split because it's just once or twice. But if I hear them fighting every day, then of course I will kind of, right? I'll be traumatized. We call this a complex PTSD, in fact. If it's accumulated events in life. So here's an example about a person that I know that I kind of counseled a bit. So one day, so his dad is an alcoholic, and mom and dad are always fighting. And I don't know if every day, but they're always fighting. And one day they were just almost violent to each other, that he defended mom. Dad was about to strike mom, and he defended mom, but he was 10 years old. But when he defended mom by pushing dad, but dad is very strong, and then he fell. And you know what mom said to him? Something about, oh, you're not courageous enough. So it really uh, like hurt him. You're not courageous enough. You're trying to defend me, but you fell. Of course, dad is strong. So this is like a kind of there's a split there. Like he's been rejecting uh, a part in him that's not courageous enough for that kind of thinking. Okay? So if it's not severe enough, I don't think the person will split. But if it's severe, the person will always split. So we'll get into some examples of, for example, a person who's always splitting. It's a good thing that we're doing this in a seminar kind of way because we don't want to hurry. And so I don't want to give you a lot of concepts, and before you know it, it's just concepts, and we're not healing. I've been praying about this, and this is, I think, a good approach to begin to look at this as a seminar. All right? There are times when we have to have concepts like, those videos from JP2 Healing. It gives us the foundation. And to me, it was more the emphasis was on the spiritual. Okay? So one of the homeworks I will give you is I'd like you to download, uh, uh, oh, my cell phone is there. Places. Okay, I'll remember it later. Because it gives you the 4 obstacles to healing. And one of them is spiritualizing. When we spiritualize everything, we don't heal because, a good example for that is like, Lord, I have a toothache. And, and just I keep praying to the Lord, Lord, please take away my toothache, that kind of thing, instead of going to the dentist. All right? So, and then there's another example where we suffered a lot of trauma, and then we just say, oh, that trauma actually made me very strong. And I began to be very close to the Lord. So, this is the keep going on kind of thing, because I decided to reject or disown the other parts so that I can become a better person, right? That's what we're talking about. And that person has become very close to the Lord. I've been going to church every day. But the trauma is still there because the person just spiritualized. So the disowned parts are there, not being listened to, because they're difficult to deal with. Okay? So that's a form of spiritualizing. The place we find ourselves, that's the app. And there's a Christian counselor there. He's not Catholic, but I've been listening to him. He's very good. The place we find ourselves. And I think it's number 179. It's actually on my phone, but 179, or just Google 4 obstacles to healing or obstacles to healing. Meaning in that app, the place we find ourselves, and then there's a search option in the app, and so put obstacles to healing. And then you'll see, he talks about the obstacles to healing. There's more. I can give a talk on that later on, but that's one of your homeworks. But we can always talk about this in a more expanded way. Okay, any more questions? Yes.
On the sheet for the prodigal, it was talking about projecting onto others.
Mm-hmm.
When you first recognize the opponent, this recognition cannot take place as long as the inner opponent is projected onto others.
Yes.
Explain what is the
Okay.
projection of the enemy on others.
When we have more understanding, I think then we begin to see more. Did you notice that? So this is a deeper question, in fact, that we might touch later on in our healing series. So did you notice that there are parts that we reject? So we're talking about the parts that I reject in myself. I don't like that part. But when we see it in others, right? When we see it in others, we begin to hate that part. Or in fact, we begin to hate the other person because this is a part that I really hate about myself. It shames me. I'm ashamed of it. Okay? Then I see it in others, then I begin to, it's the projection that we have. Isn't it? Do you notice that in life all the time? Even if you don't know psychology, We just understand it in Christian life. The things that I hate about myself, I also hate in others. That's why the opposite of it is the moment we are reconciled with our parts, then the more, then we see it in others and we have compassion over others. I began to see this as like this is the gift. This is what makes us good Christians when we are healed in ourselves, the parts in us that are healed. We no longer reject the parts that are in us. We are now fully integrated. And then what we see in others, oh, I used to have that. Let me help this person because I've been healed. You see? Okay, so that's what's going on in there. It's more spiritual, but the reason why I gave it to you is like to give a spiritual motif, a spiritual flavor to what we're doing. Okay? Okay. Can you give the microphone, please? If we don't, there's a lot that I have to talk about tonight, but it's fine. Because it's good that we're slowing down and just entertaining questions. Okay, please. It's okay. Don't worry. Don't be sorry.
I didn't catch all of what you said about homework. You wanted us to look at.
Should say again?
Can you tell us what the homework is?
Oh, yes, yes. Can you download the app? It's an app called The Place We Find Ourselves. And there's a lot of talks there. And one of the talks is four obstacles to healing. Okay? All right. Next time I'll give you a list of the homeworks, but for now, just do that. Okay. The other one, go to YouTube. Okay, that's the other homework now that I remember. And just put on the search toddler who adjusts attitude. Toddlers, where did I write that down? Toddler adjusting his attitude to adults. And I think it will show. Are you doing that? Did you see that? Toddler adjusting his attitude to adults. Okay. Just to give you what's going on. Okay. Any more questions? Okay, here's more about splitting. 66. I have so many pages. Okay, did you notice this? This is important to realize. If the good child, so the good child is this. There are parents that are really bad. Forgive me to say that. No, there are parents who, and it's because they don't know how to be good parents. So remember, I used to say, what is not transformed will be transmitted, meaning hurt people hurt people. So if the good child is distasteful to parents or to caregivers, it can be more adaptive to disown the good me. Did you notice that? It might not apply to you, but this is true. Like a good child trying to be good, but the parents, how come you're studying so much? How come you're so goody-goody? Whatever. Right? And so the kid is like, like he's so confused. I cannot be good. I'd rather be bad. So let me hang out with my, friends that does drugs or whatever. You see? Those are neglectful parents, and sometimes it could affect us. Okay, some parents are not that bad, but they also have a glimpse of this. When we say to us, did you notice that? Sometimes it could be in our life when we're growing up that, how come you're always cleaning? How come you take showers every day? Oh, Because they could be annoyed or they're just like moody. And then the kid would be like, what's wrong? It's supposed to be good, to clean and to take shower every day. So that's a person could be a child could be confused. If it happens all the time, then we call them neglect for parents, and the child adopts, and the child would say, I'd rather be bad than do good, because my parents cannot accept me if I'm good. All right. So okay. Now, of course, when we adopt, that's when we begin to the cost of adaptation, and we carry it with us in adult life. And there you go. All of us are trying to make sense of our life sometimes if we're not fully healed. And that's the reason why you're here. Because maybe you're going through a lot of whatever it is. Here's a good example for the men. There's a lot of men here. Later on, I'll give an example of a woman. So Aaron described the reasons for which he had come. So he came to a psychologist to counseling, and he says, I start out by getting attached to women very quickly. I immediately think they're the one. I'm all over them. Can't get enough of them. I spend a lot of time with them, until they start to get serious or there's a commitment. Then I suddenly start to see everything I didn't see before, everything that's wrong with them. I start feeling trapped with someone who's not right for me. I want to leave, but I feel guilty or afraid they leave me. I'm stuck. I cannot relax and be happy, but I can't get out of it either. Sounds familiar? Yeah. We probably know somebody like that, or we have a little bit of that, the tendency. It could happen also to women, right? When we were dating, right? That kind of thing. It could be different, but kind of similar. So, what's going on here? Aaron was describing an internal struggle between parts. So, you see, this is what happens when there's a splitting. Between an attachment seeking part, okay, attachment, I want to be attached to this woman. Between an attachment seeking part that quickly connected to any attractive woman who treated him warmly, and a hyper-vigilant, hypercritical fight part that reacted to every less than optimal quality she possessed as a sign of trouble. Okay? His flight, so there's a lot of terminologies here that's coming up. Okay? Let me just define this thing. All right. We'll get a little bit technical. But this psychological reactions to things: flight, fight, freeze. All right, so a lot of you know that. They're like what we call autonomic responses, meaning we're alive. It just means, okay, so just use the layman's term. We're alive, so we need to fight or freeze. So fighting is about if somebody, so make it simple. If somebody cuts me off on the road, right, I might fight. I might throw things at the car, right? Or I could take flight. Okay, I could just change lanes and slow down and change lane and be gone. Go away. Or I could also freeze. Oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. I'm just like, all of a sudden I got cut off. So I just freeze. I could just stop on the median, whatever, because I freeze. And it depends on the severity, right? There's also reactions like what I call Okay, we'll talk about the other two, but for now, flight, fight, and freeze. Like you know what freeze is with the deer that got caught in the headlights. Freeze, don't know what to do. Okay, where was I? About Aaron. So what's going on with Aaron? Aaron was describing an internal struggle between parts, between an attachment-seeking part that quickly connected to any attractive woman who treated him warmly, and a hyper-vigilant. You know hyper-vigilant? I have eyes behind my head. I'm always watching. Hypercritical fight part. So that's part of the fight aspect. When we're always hypercritical, we're kind of antagonistic, we're hypervigilant, that reacted to every less than optimal quality she possessed as a sign of trouble. Right? So meaning, if she's not the right woman for me, she's imperfect, then I have to fight it. I don't want that. His flight part, triggered by the alarms of the fight part, then would start to feel trapped with what felt like the wrong person. So flight, I need to go because she's not the right woman for me. You see? Generating impulses to get out, an action that his submit and cry for help parts couldn't allow. So there's another two things here. Submit and cry for help. Okay, later on we'll see what that means. Guilt and shame for the commitment he'd promised and fear of loss kept him in relationships that his fight and flight parts resisted with equal intensity. Without a language to differentiate its part and bring it to his awareness, he ruminated constantly, should he leave or should he stay? Was she enough or should he get out now? Right? Did you see that? There's always going back and forth. Should I stay or should I leave? Is she enough for me or not? So, and there's a lot of confusion. And if it's severe enough, the person might even contemplate suicide. Right? So, okay. We do this all the time sometimes. You know, sometimes it could be simple decision making. Should I rest or should I go to work? Sometimes, you know, like there's a lot of work, administrative work to be done here in the Paris. So at 8 p.m., for example, me, I'm using a personal example after dinner. Okay, should I just chit chat, shoot breeze with my brothers, or should I go back to the office and work? And sometimes it takes time to make a decision. So to me, I have actually parts. I have parts that sometimes are not, so eventually we'll talk about this. Parts that are blended. You know, that's why I cannot decide. So later on, we'll introduce, some of you already like started reading that book about the self, the God in me, that if the God in me is like the conductor of our orchestra and trying to like look at the parts. And if the self is always the one, you know, always the one directing the parts, then we're fine. But if the parts are all blended with each other, then I'm like, should I work or should I not? Should I leave or should I not? Okay? So just an introduction on that. Okay. I'd like you to get to that. So it seems to me that we're just making inputs tonight. I'd like you to get to that sheet now. And so this is parts again. We're talking about parts. And just look at uh, the first one, the first figure, structural dissociation model. So this will inform us more about the splitting, the adaptation, why we have different parts. Going on with normal life part. So that's the boy. When there's quarrels in the home, he tends to disown it so he can go on with his life in school and become a good person, become an honor student, you know, loves horses, loves art. All of us have that, right? going on with normal life part. Okay. The second, you see that trauma-related part of the personality. So the boy who keeps going on became really good in intellectual capacities, learned a lot of languages, but there's also trauma in the house, in the home, when mom and dad are always fighting. Okay? So this is basically Aaron. You know, the example I just said, there's a fight part, there's a flight part, there's a freeze part, there's a submit part, and then there's a cry for help part. Okay, what is a submit part? So a submit part, like in my example, and we can explore it further. Like if a car cuts me off, right? And then I will just say to myself, like, okay, that's fine. I don't have to do anything. I just resign that I'm defeated. That's the submit part. The cry for help part, okay, if I got cut off by a car, I will call the police. All right? You see that? Okay. If you go to the second figure, you begin to see this. All right. Okay, let me just say something first. Persons report symptoms of major depression. That's the submit part. Anxiety disorders. That's the freeze part. Substance abuse and eating disorders. That's the flight part. You know, when there's gluttony, when there's a lot of eating, there's actually flight. I'm taking flight from my own trauma-related uh, things. Anger management or self-harm issues, that's fight. And they alternately cling to others or push them away. The characteristic symptoms of disorganized or traumatic attachment. Sometimes they come with co-occurring issues, you know, like chronic pain, obsessive compulsive disorder, inability to function, or loss of previous functioning. Okay, so look at this thing now. Going on with normal life part of the self. Trauma-related parts of the personality. So, as a child, we adapt, we split. There's all this adaptation. But if it's not healed, as adults, this is what becomes of it. Right? So now, the fight vigilance, like the example I gave you with Aaron, is angry, judgmental, mistrustful, self-destructive, controlling, suicidal, needs to control. That's the fight, vigilance. The flight, distancer, ambivalent, cannot commit, addictive behavior or eating disorder. The freeze, which is about fear, frozen, terrified, wary, phobic of being seen, agoraphobic, reports panic attacks. So the submit, which is about shame, depressed, ashamed, filled with self-hatred, passive, good girl, caretaker, self-sacrificing. It could be a martyr complex. Attached, needy, so attachment, you know, it's one of the psychological aspects. Desperate, craves rescue and connection, sweet, innocent, wants someone to depend on. Okay, let's pause here. It's now 8:30, but spend about 10 minutes before you go. We'll finish about 8:45. Spend about 10 minutes and just look at this desperate, uh, these categories that we just enumerated, and spend about 10-15 minutes and look at these parts that is predominant in you. Okay? Okay, so that's what is these parts that are predominant in me? Second, what is the origin? So you begin to connect it to the childhood trauma or wounds that you have experienced so that we can begin to see. You begin to see. And so we'll end there and we'll continue with that. We'll continue with more understanding of how to begin to extricate ourselves from these things. So, but for now, connect it with the childhood traumas that you have experienced. Okay, questions?
Are you saying that we all have to be in one of these?
It could be it could be several, it could be two. You don't have to be in any one of these, but sometimes some of them predominates. So for example, have you met people who are very needy? Right? Okay, so they want to attach all the time. And they're in fact looking all the time. So that could be a person who has that predominant wound in the person. So we might have a little bit of fight, I mean, I probably have a lot of fight because I used to be a very angry person until God healed me or work on my healing. So to me, fight was something that I predominantly had. Not so much flight, but fight. Okay? So some of them, you have to have maybe one or two that's that is predominant in you. And then you begin to understand. Later on, we will talk about, for example, some of the impulses. So remember, going back to the first thing that we talked about, you have to be reconciled with the self who adopted. But that self has a lot of impulses. He could be doing drugs. He could be masturbating, looking at pornography. He could be drinking alcohol. So you don't want to be reconciled with the impulses, the desires, the thoughts. All those are part of the wounded person. Like desires, oh, I could kill my dad. It could be that. Like some of us maybe in childhood had those desires. They don't get implemented, but they had desires, fantasies. So we begin to like see these connections with, for example, fight. There's a person who tells me that every time I see women, I just want to punch. I want to punch them because this person was really abused by a woman. You see, so that kind of thing. All right, so just look at this. Look at where what is predominant in me, and so connect it with the wound of as a child, the trauma that I suffered in life.